The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is a proposed trade agreement between the European Union and the United States with the aim of promoting trade and multilateral economic growth. TTIP is considered by the U.S. a companion agreement to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The negotiations were halted indefinitely following the 2016 U.S. presidential elections, but by mid-2017, representatives of both the US and the EU expressed willingness to resume the negotiations. According to Karel de Gucht, European Commissioners for Trade between 2010 and 2014, the TTIP is the largest bilateral trade initiative ever negotiated, not only because it involves the two largest economies in the world, but also because of its potential global reach in setting an example for future partners and agreements. Its main three broad areas are market access, specific regulations, and broader rules and principles and modes of cooperation. The negotiations were planned to be finalized by the end of 2014, but would have not been finished more than 5 years later, until 2019 or 2020, following a normal negotiation schedule, according to the economist Hosuke Makiyama in 2015. There are many actors involved in the negotiation, but the European Parliament and the International Trade Committee, which is known as ENTA, are crucial in this debate. The INTA is responsible for the establishment, implementations, and monitoring of the Union's common commercial policy and its external economic relations in the European Parliament. Therefore, the European Parliament position regarding the TTIP mandate and negotiations were drafted by it. Chief negotiators are Ignacio Gracia Bercero, Director of Unit for Neighboring Countries, US and Canada, and the DG Trade, and his American counterpart, Dan Mullenly, United States Trade Representative, also known as USTR. Also, representatives of all stakeholders take part of the process, including business associations, trade unions, non-governmental organizations, consumer groups, and trade associations. For instance, there is also a TTIP advisory group of 16 independent specialists who represent business, service industries, agriculture, trade union, consumers, and health and the environment. The effect of TTIP are strongly determined by the scope of trade liberation. Liberation means to free the economy from direct or physical control imposed by the government. A transatlantic free trade agreement offers geopolitical benefits for the EU and the West. Supporters of a deal should make this point to claim back ground from the anti-TTIP camp. Proponents of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership between the US and the EU, known as TTIP, face an uphill struggle. Since negotiations started in 2013, the momentum has been with TTIP's opponents. In Europe, they have mobilized support on social media in parliaments and other streets. TTIP advocates focus on the economic benefits, removing the remaining tariffs, aligning rules and standards, and reducing the paperwork required for doing transatlantic business should all lead to economic growth. Critics such as trade union and left-of-center parties in Germany, France, and Austria warn that TTIP is a secretive agreement that would force Europe to adopt inferior American standards and would subordinate European democracies to U.S. corporate interests. In response, the European Commission has decided to make many of its negotiating documents public, but that will not satisfy many opponents to a deal. Policymakers and politicians must therefore focus their message on the undecided and those whose interests are not purely economic. While the economic benefits of TTIP are difficult to quantify, the geostrategic impact warrants closer attention in Europe. A successful TTIP would bring Europe a number of strategic benefits. TTIP would allow the West to set global trade standards, strengthen Western diplomacy, improve European energy security, and reaffirm transatlantic ties. China is trying to set up alternatives to Western-dominated international financial institutions. The UK, France, and Germany provoked American irritations when they announced that they would join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as founding members. Size matters, particularly in the geopolitical of trade. A new seamless market based on transatlantic tariffs, free zone with a large degree of regulatory convergence would be a major attraction for others. If two economic giants agreed to align consumer safety, environmental investments protection, and other hands, their combined pull would bring others to copy these standards to gain market access. This would expand Western influence. The negotiating process of TTIP creates many different critics that, in sum, emphasize the continuity of EU cuts and the benefits would be the elites of multinational corporations from Europe and the States. The current institutions are facing some structural problems that are highlighting some of the shortages of democracy, and more specifically, transparency, forced labor, or social rights. This weakens is mirrored in TTIP as follows. First of all, the lack of transparency in the negotiations. The publication of the negotiating text are secret for the next 30 years after they bring to the table of negotiation. Just some of them can be consulted by members of the European Parliament. However, the European Commission has alleged these are the more transparent negotiation we have done until now. Secondly, there are some studios that predict that TTIP would lead to massive unemployment, as it happened in the North America Free Trade Agreement that forecasts the creation of working place, but around 1 million people lost their jobs. Thirdly, this treaty advocates for the privatization of service, such as healthcare or education. This could mean the loss of public service, quality, lack of transparency of clinical trials, or the rise of the price. At the same time, it would mean the development of precariousness of popular classes. Moreover, the loss of social labor and environmental rights is part of this treaty because there will be a reduction of social and environmental standards due to a lax legislation of both sides of the Atlantic. As a matter of fact, the USA has worse standards of the European Union, but the USA had stronger legislation on speculation. Highest control of civilians also characterizes this treaty because there would be cyber control of people of their personal details by controlling them for commercial aims. Finally, there is degradation of democracy due to the fact that negotiation considers the possibility of protecting inversions, which would mean that foreign investors could legally challenge public environmental, social, healthcare policies in the international tribunals, as it has happened in investor-state dispute settlements. Even though the European Commission has tried to deny these critics, but there are enough evidence to prove it. In conclusion, all in all, we can say that negotiations have been lasting since 2013. As stated before, many voices have risen opposing the solidification of the partnership, while many others, especially multinationals and big corporations as well as states, have been advocating for the negotiation to reach its end and creating a transatlantic trade and investment partnership. The TTIP was voted at the beginning of 2013, it would be expected to be a fast and efficient process towards the agreement. As we have been able to appreciate, the negotiations have been slower and more complex than announced, as the EU and the US discuss much more than a free trade agreement. The other objectives at stake like harmonized rules, control and administrative requirements, coordinate law that will have commercial impact or facilitate investments, is what gives a measure of the different ambitions and somehow slow the process of negotiation. As stated before, it all has led to an early division between detractors and supporters of the process.